In a world where hustle culture collides with wellness warnings and workplace demands keep evolving, how do we stay sharp without burning out? How do we navigate the endless stream of wellness trends while actually getting results? This is the Work and Wellness Podcast, and I'm your host, Ange Davis. Drawing from my own journey of wins, stumbles, and honest revelations, I'll be bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with experts and inspiring guests who've been there, lived it, and found a better way. Together, we'll cut through the noise and workshop what it really means to be well in today's workplace. No more choosing between success and sanity. No more sacrificing health for achievement. Whether you're struggling with burnout, searching for purpose, or simply ready to work smarter, not harder, you're in the right place. This is real talk about real solutions for real people. Let's get into it. Hello, friends. Welcome to the show. Today, I want to talk about self-awareness because I think it's something that we talk about a lot when it comes to leadership, performance, growth, personal growth, and it's for good reason. Self-awareness is really, really important. But I do think we're in an age where we talk a lot about self-awareness, but what I'm noticing more and more is that self-awareness gets focused on so much that we forget that self-awareness is simply the start point, and actually where we make change is the action. Because I always say it doesn't matter what we know, it matters what we do. And most people that I work with are already pretty aware. They can tell you what their patterns are under pressure or where they might overthink, maybe some of the things that they fear or even where they hesitate or even the behaviors that they default to when they're operating under pressure. But when you look at changing day-to-day behavior, it's often not much different. And so I think we've defaulted to talking a lot about self-awareness, and there's so many tools and therapy and different ways that we can become self-aware. But what's important is that self-awareness is really just the starting point. It's not the finish point. And so I want to talk about that gap today between self-awareness and then actual behavior change that changes the way that we show up, the way we lead, the way we are in our personal and professional lives, because that's what ultimately changes the end state or the end performance. I think a lot of people get stuck at self-awareness because you feel like you're taking action. So, journaling, going to therapy, doing assessment tools or analyzing, it feels like you're making sense of your behavior, and that's really valuable. But it can also keep you stuck because we can feel like we're moving and progressing just by doing all of these things. It can also keep us in our head, and we can intellectualize our way out of any behavior, really. We might do things like replay conversations or think about how we could have handled something differently. And then we set an intention to do better next time, and it feels like you've moved forward. But our results are not driven by what we understand. They're driven by what we do and what we do consistently, particularly when we're under pressure. Because when we have time and energy and resources, it's easy to make a different choice, or easier to make a different choice. But when we're under pressure, when we're stressed, when we're tired, it becomes much more difficult to change our behavior. And this is where I find a lot of people get stuck, is because awareness without a shift in behavior is really just a more sophisticated way of thinking about the same patterns. Like I said, we over-intellectualize the patterns that we have, but we don't actually make changes to our behavior consistently. So why does this happen? From a neuroscience perspective, it's exactly what we would expect. So our brain, I call our brain lazy. Maybe it's a little overly harsh, but our brain is always looking for efficiency. And under pressure, like I said before, when we're tired, when we're overwhelmed, when we're stressed, our brain defaults to what is familiar, what's well practiced, and what has already been built as a neural pathway in our brain. But that's not always what's most effective. if we know intellectually a better way to respond, our automatic patterns take over unless something purposefully interrupts them. So that's why someone can know they need to maybe be more direct and still soften their message in a moment. Or maybe someone knows they need to have a difficult conversation, but they still put it off. Or they know that they need to slow down and not rush through a decision, but they still end up rushing through the decision. It's not a knowledge gap, a behavioral gap. And it's really important to understand the distinction between the two, because sometimes we lump them all in together as one thing, but they're actually two very different things, because it changes how we approach improvement in this space. So if we really want to shift and get our behaviors to change, the shift does not require more reflection typically. Now, for some people, there is a lack of self-awareness and more reflection is helpful. But for many people, it's actually learning to recognize our patterning as it's happening in the moment and then choosing a different response in that exact moment. And what that takes is a very strong level of presence, because we need to be present and see and realize how we're reacting or how that pattern is showing up in the moment. And it sounds simple, but like I said, it requires a really high level of presence and discipline that many people either haven't trained in or they're moving too quickly to even notice. It is much easier to reflect afterwards and say, oh, this is what I'm going to do differently next time, than it is to be right in the middle of a situation and feel the pull of your usual response, but then pause long enough to actually make a different decision. But when we're able to be present and pause, that's where we actually are able to elicit change in our behavior, because in the moment, we're not operating in autopilot anymore then. We're actively shaping our behavior. And when we do that consistently over time, that starts to build new neural pathways in our brain. And with enough consistency and time, that now becomes our new autopilot. So if we want to make this really practical about how we shift our behaviors, not just have a level of self-awareness, it needs to start with narrowing our focus. So how many of us have sort of taken a moment, we've become self-aware, and then we think, okay, these are all the things that I need to shift and change. And then you try and throw everything in the kitchen sink at it, and we feel overwhelmed. I think that's a really normal response. And so I always say, instead of trying to improve everything at once, just identify one pattern that you know consistently shows up under pressure and that might be getting in your way of success. And then get clear on what a better response looks like with very specific behaviors. So I'll give you a couple of examples here that might help. If you have a tendency to over-explain, many of us have that, particularly women. So if we have a decision or roll out a decision, we then over-explain that decision. Our action moving forward, if we don't want to over-explain, might be to say your point once and stop. Even if there's an awkward silence, even if you feel like there's a pull to keep talking. Or another example might be if you're someone who tends to avoid difficult conversations. You might then schedule it within a set time frame so it doesn't just sit in the background. And then you might take steps by preparing and writing down the things that you want to say. So that might be your action that you can put behind putting off a difficult conversation. Because being aware of needing to have a difficult conversation and having a difficult conversation are two very different things. Or if you're someone who feels constantly rushed and like you're making decisions on the fly without really thinking them through, next time a decision comes, you might pause and say, you know what? I'm going to go sit in a completely different location. I'm going to take 3 Stanford breaths, or the physiological sigh, big inhale, extra sip of air, big exhale, and then you're going to sit and write down what your decision is. The key here is that you decide in advance what the behavior is going to be. So I call it a if-then behavior. So if a decision comes up, then I'm going to sit in a different place and take some deep breaths. If I know I have to have a difficult conversation, then I'm going to schedule it and write down some notes so that I make sure that it actually happens. So if-then statements really help to predetermine what behavior you're going to take moving forward. Then the work really comes in noticing when the pattern shows up and continuing to practice the alternative response. And I want to call out here, we are all human. We're not going to get it right every single time. That is normal. We're not robots. But every time we do catch it and we choose differently, we're reinforcing a new neural pathway. So it's progress over perfection. Anytime you notice that old pattern or that situation coming up, try and implement your new behavior. So this is where neuroplasticity becomes really relevant because our brain changes through experience and not insight. Again, it's that saying, it doesn't matter what we know, it matters what we do. And so when we respond differently in the moment that our brain expects our old behavior, we start to weaken that existing neural pathway and we strengthen a new neural pathway. And that is how change becomes sustainable, because those new neural pathways become our new autopilot, which means we put less work in the future when these same scenarios come up because they're much more embedded. And so it's not the big one-off decisions or doing it once. It's through repeated behavior and clocking it in the moment that actually builds our new neural pathways. And over time, what once felt effortful starts to feel natural because of that autopilot that I mentioned earlier. And that's when we notice that those neural pathways are really starting to embed. So when you start to do this consistently, performance changes in a really tangible way because we're able to communicate with more clarity because we're not diluting the message, or we're able to make better decisions because we're not reacting, but rather we're taking a moment to step back and really think about what our decision is. Or we build stronger relationships because we address things in difficult conversations earlier rather than letting them fester. And I think what's most important about this is that you begin to trust yourself more because your actions are aligned with what you know. And so it's almost like a little gift when we start to implement the action off the back of the self-awareness, is that we build self-trust. We become the person who does what we know we should be doing. And that's where confidence comes from. So if you want to give it a go and apply this straight away, I'm going to share 4 ways for you to get started and just give it a go. So the first one is just choose one pattern that you want to change because, like I said earlier, trying everything at once spreads your attention too thin. We throw everything at it, it becomes overwhelming and we give up. So just identify the one behavior that you think might be holding you back that shows up consistently when you're under stress or pressure. Then you want to define your alternative in behavioral terms. So know exactly what you're going to do differently. So not just communicate better, but very specifically what you're going to do differently. Schedule the conversation in 24 hours and write down what I want to say, for example, if it's a difficult conversation. Or if you feel like you're someone who over-explains, you're going to say the point once, stop and allow the uncomfortable silence. The third thing is build a pause into your response. So change in behavior requires interruption, and even a brief pause creates a space between our automatic behavior and then our chosen behavior. So allow a little bit of space, and often this is actually the most difficult part because many of us are moving so quickly through life that we don't allow those moments of pause. Finally, track the moments when you catch them. So at the end of the day, take a moment to reflect on what pattern came up and whether you interrupted it. So that really keeps your focus on behavior rather than just awareness. So I'll recap those. Choose one thing that you want to change, one behavior, not 5. That's the if in the statement. So if X behavior happens, then you're going to define the alternative in behavioral terms. So if X happens, I am going to do Y. Anytime you're under pressure and the opportunity to exhibit this behavior comes up, take a moment to pause. Pausing interrupts our automatic response. And then at the end of the day, take a moment to reflect. Did the situation come up? How did I respond with my old behavior or my new one? And again, be easy on yourself. It's okay if from time to time the old behavior comes up. It takes time and consistency to embed the new neural pathways, which make these behaviors autopilot. So I think if there's one thing that you take from today, it's that self-awareness isn't the outcome. It's actually the starting point. And the real work is what we do with the self-awareness that we have, particularly in moments where we're stressed or overwhelmed. And it would be easier to default to our old patterns because over time, our patterns are not shaped by what we know, they're shaped by what we repeatedly do. So if you've got a pattern that you want to change, try those if-then behaviors. Add the pause, reflect at the end of every day. I hope this has been helpful. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining me on Work and Wellness.
If today's episode resonated with you, remember, someone in your network might need to hear this too. Share it with a colleague or friend who could use these insights. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so find us on Instagram at Mind Your Grit, where we share daily tips and continue these discussions. And if you found value in today's episode, please take time to rate and review the show. It makes such a huge difference and helps other people discover conversations they might really need. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we're building a community of people who believe that success and well-being go hand in hand. You can find the notes, resources, and links from today's episode at mindyourgrit.com. This is Work and Wellness with Ange Davis. Your work matters, your wellness matters, and this is where it all comes together. See you next week.